Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be discussing the Fire Warlock in Classic WoW. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that all my previous videos have been PvP focused, but I want to make this video for PvE because I feel like it's a topic that has not been explored a whole lot, and I think that come AQ, especially if people share this video and it gets around, that Fire Warlock will actually become very popular on these new anniversary realms, and I'm going to be discussing why in this video. Because depending on your guild situation, I would argue that Fire Warlock is definitely a way better option than your traditional Warlock spec. But let's just get into it because there's a lot to talk about, and I'm going to go pretty far in depth looking at like gear simulations and stuff like that. So let's get into it. So it's common knowledge, I would say like 99% of Warlocks are aware that there's really two rating specs for a Warlock, and it's SM Ruin and DS Ruin. So let's just really quickly look at these specs. So this is an example of like a SM Ruin build. The most notable talents being over here in Affliction you get Shadow Mastery for 10% shadow damage. We get Nightfall for the occasional instant Shadowbolt. And then in the Destruction Tree, improved Shadowbolt, giving you 20% increased shadow damage on what should be a pretty good uptime, depending on how many Warlocks are in your guild and how geared they are, because it's dependent on Shadowbolt crits. And then Ruin, the double damage on crits. Very good. So those are like the big things for SM Ruin. And the play style is really put up your assigned curse, put up corruption, because one, it's a nice dot, and then two, to try to proc Nightfall, and then just spam Shadowbolt. It's pretty simple. And then you're also gonna have an imp out, and if the imp is not susceptible to AoE, he's gonna be spamming his firebolt. And then the other alternative is DS Ruin. So with this spec, we still get improved Shadowbolt and Ruin and Destruction Tree. The talents don't change there. But then instead of Shadow Mastery and Nightfall for 10% shadow damage and occasional Shadowbolt crits, we're going into Demonology. Pretty much all this is filler talents just for Demonic Sacrifice, which, as you'll see over here, 15% shadow damage for sacrificing your succubus. So this spec will have an inherent 5% more shadow damage compared to SM Ruin, but it is lacking the occasional instant Shadowbolt from Nightfall, and also you do not have a pet out with this spec, so you don't have an imp to be shooting his fireballs because you're sacrificing succubus. Both DS Ruin and SM Ruin are very comparable. It's really personal preference, but the playstyle is pretty much the same. Put up your curse, put up corruption, depending on how long the mob's gonna live. Corruption's more important for SM Ruin because of Nightfall, but other than your curse and possibly corruption, you're just spamming Shadowbolt. Spam Shadowbolt, that's it. Big damage, very simple. But now let's look at some fire specs, because this isn't the only way to play. Common knowledge, or just public opinion, will tell you that you have SM Ruin or DS Ruin. But I would say there's two other specs that are viable for PvE, especially come AQ. So this is the Confl build, a Fire Warlock spec. So what are the notable talents here? So we have, we actually get some talents for our imp. So as you'll notice, we don't have like Demonic Sacrifice, so we're going to have a pet out. And it's going to be the imp. In this build, you're able to get over here, improved imp, and over here, improved firebolt. You can see the description up here. Improved imp increases the effectiveness of your imp's firebolt by 30%. And then improved firebolt reduces the cast time of it by 1 second. So these two talents together make your imp fairly powerful. Especially if you're like popping a black book pre-pull and then swapping it out for like a Nel's Tier or something. Your imp can actually do some pretty good damage with these talents. We get instant corruption, but that's the only thing. Infliction, and then everything else is destruction. So what do we get? We don't take improved Shadowbolt because we don't need it, because we're casting Searing Pain. This is our new filler spell. And we get improved Searing Pain. So this talent right here, 10% crit on Searing Pain. Pretty nice. Other notable talents is improved Immolate. This is a very good talent. 25% damage on Immolate for the initial damage, right? Not the dot. Just the initial attack, 25% increased damage. Your Immolate can hit pretty hard with this spec. Then we get Embertorm, this right here. 10% increased fire damage. Pretty much just the fire version of this Shadow Mastery that we're familiar with from Affliction. And then we get a new capstone talent, Confl. Big instant fire damage on a 10-second cooldown. It can be used on any target that already has Immolate. Very strong ability. Also nice that it's instant cast, so you can be pretty mobile with this spec. You have Confl, you have instant corruption, 2 spells that can be done on the move. Pretty nice. But as you can see, there's a lot of nice talents for these fire abilities. But is Confl the only fire spec? You're kind of probably thinking, well, if I'm going to play Fire Warlock, of course I want Confl. That's the best ability. But there's actually another spec. And this is DS Embertorm. So with this spec, you still get Embertorm. You still get 5 out of 5. So that's that 10% fire damage that you want. And you still get improved Searing Pain. But you don't have enough points to get more than... You only get 1 point in improved Immolate. And you don't get Confl. You don't even get instant corruption. Because the rest of your points are going down to Demonology for Demonic Sacrifice. And instead of sacrificing the Succubus, if you sacrifice your Imp, you get 15% fire damage. So the Confl is like the SM Ruin build of fire, where you have your Imp out and you're casting fire abilities. And then DS Embertorm is like the DS Ruin of Fire Warlock, right? You're sacrificing your Imp, and then just you're spamming your fire abilities. But which one's better, Confl or DS Embertorm? Well, we're gonna look into that. The answer may surprise you. So let's talk a bit, now that we've kind of looked at the talents, like the notable talents, right? Let's talk about why have Warlocks been spamming Shadowbolt this whole time, and why you may even still be spamming Shadowbolt in AQ and Axe until TBC. Well, there's a reason for that. Even though the fire talents are like better, there's more good fire talents, Shadowbolt is just a better ability than Searing Pain for a couple reasons. One, let's just look at baseline Shadowbolt and Searing Pain. You'll notice that 3-second cast, 1.5-second cast. So you'd expect Shadowbolt to do double the damage of Searing Pain. But since it's double the cast time, right? To make it like even. But Shadowbolt does more than double the damage of Searing Pain. If you do the math, this number is higher than this number times 2. Plus, Shadowbolt is actually only a 2.5-second cast because of Bane. The second row talent in Destruction that every rating spec takes half second off Shadowbolt. So Shadowbolt is a 2.5-second cast that does more than double the damage of Searing Pain at a 1.5-second cast. So Shadowbolt just hits harder than Searing Pain by a fair amount. Plus, being a 3-second cast baseline and then reduced down to 2.5, Shadowbolt has a 86% spell power coefficient, meaning that for every 1 spell power that you have in your gear, 0.86 of that is actually contributing to bonus damage on your Shadowbolt. If you don't know a lot about spell power coefficients, just know that 86 is a good one. Not many abilities have more than this. And then Searing Pain is just at a 43 spell power coefficient, so that you could have 2 points of spell power in your gear, and you still won't even have 1 full damage on Searing Pain. And then the third reason that Shadowbolt is just better than Searing Pain is that improved Shadowbolt is simply a better talent than improved Searing Pain. Shadowbolt, if you have 3 or 4 warlocks in your guild and they have, especially if they have world buffs, they have good crit, you could have like 90+% uptime on improved Shadowbolt, 20% damage. Whereas improved Searing Pain is just 10% crit. 10% crit is nice, for sure, but does not really compare to 20% damage on a fairly good uptime. And then the other reason that Shadowbolt has been being spammed instead of Searing Pain is that in Molten Core and BWL, half the mobs are immune to fire anyways. That's why so many mages are playing Arcane Frost or Winter's Chill, because try hitting Ragnaros with a firebolt and see what happens. Nothing's going to happen. You're going to do no damage. So that's another contributing factor. And then another contributing factor is that, look at this text on Searing Pain. Causes a high amount of threat. Even without that text, warlocks who are spamming Shadowbolt, if their tank is not blasting, and if you are blasting, you're going to pull threat or get close to it, even with just Shadowbolt. Shadowbolt already does a lot of threat. But Searing Pain, you could really climb the meter on Searing Pain. If you're just getting crit, 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 Searing Pain, Searing Pain, Searing Pain. If your tank gets unlucky parry on a Bloodthirst, you may pull threat and wipe the raid. So those are like 4 or 5 reasons that why Shadowbolt is better than Searing Pain, and warlocks have been spamming Shadowbolt for the past 20 years. But it's not all doom and gloom, or else I would not be making this video. So let's talk about where fire really shines, and that is AoE. So on trash and some bosses, but mostly like trash, right? You're probably doing a lot of AoE, whether that's tab dotting or getting everything grouped up to Hellfire. Both the tab dot situation and the Hellfire situation is way better as these fire specs. So let's look at DS Embertorm. You have 25% increased fire damage with this spec. You get 10% from Embertorm and 15% from sacrificing your imp. So on the situations where you're Hellfiring, compared to like a SM Rune Warlock, you're literally going to be doing 25% more damage than your Shadow Warlock counterparts when you're Hellfiring. It's a pretty big difference on trash. 25% is a lot. Imagine your Hellfire is ticking for 200. Well, the Fire Warlock next to you, your Hellfire is ticking for 250 a pop. Pretty big difference. Also, if you look at Immolate and Corruption, I have them down here at the bottom of the slide. Not taking any talents or anything into consideration, the Immolate just does more damage than Corruption. Corruption at 666, and then Immolate at 258 initial plus 485 over 15 seconds. It's just more damage. And you may be thinking, okay, that's true, but Corruption, if you have instant cast Corruption, which most specs do, it's instant cast. Immolate has a cast time. But would you believe me if I told you that Immolate is actually faster than Corruption? Believe it or not, it is, depending on your gear. So with Bane, the second talent in the Destruction tree, you have a 1.5 second Immolate, which pretty much every spec takes that talent, right? So 1.5 second, whereas Corruption is instacast. But there's a GCD, of course. So the global cooldown in Classic WoW is 1.5 seconds. So tab immolating 4 or 5 different enemies, you can accomplish that at the same speed of doing tab Corruption. The only downside is that with Immolate compared to Corruption is that Being instant cast corruption, you could like move around and get into position to Hellfire more effectively. Whereas immolate, you have to stand still to cast, right? But what's interesting is that the 3-piece for the epic PvP or 4-piece for the blue PvP gear is a 0.2 second cast time reduction on immolate. And that set bonus is very unique in Classic WoW because there's no haste in Classic WoW. But with that set bonus, you actually reduce your GCD to 1.3 seconds with immolate specifically. So you can immolate with that gear setup faster than a warlock spamming corruption, like tab corruption, right? You could actually get immolates off faster than an instant cast corruption. And then, so I wanted to briefly mention that. So immolate is just better than corruption in tab dot situations. In 2019 Classic, there was a debuff limit, so like you could barely get away with corruption on trash. There's no shot you could like also have warlocks immolating, but that's no longer the case. That's not an issue anymore. Now that I briefly went over like the immolate corruption thing, why is fire better for AoE? Well, yeah, DS Embertorm 25% increased fire damage. So what you're really gonna want to do is just as mobs are like running in to get into position, you immolate them, and then you want to get in there and Hellfire because with this spec, your Hellfire is 25% more powerful than like a Shadow Warlock. So Hellfire is really what you want with this DS Embertorm build. Then with the Confl build, we still get 10% increased fire damage from Embertorm. And then the tab immolate is way better with this spec because we get 25% increased initial damage on immolate. So Hellfire is not as important for this spec, and it's not as potent when compared to DS Embertorm. But that tab immolate is going to really do some serious trash damage. And then the Confl spec also has the benefit of having instant cast corruption, so that what you may want to do for trash with the Confl spec is you as it's getting into position, you tab immolate all the targets. Then you as you're running in, you're putting corruption on a couple of them. Then as soon as you get into position, you Hellfire. With the DS Embertorm build, you don't have the luxury of instant cast corruption. So as you're running in, if you're trying to be a team player, you probably should be using your curse anyways. But it really depends on like how long the trash is going to be alive. That's a whole nother topic. But you don't have the luxury of using corruption on the way into the trash pack with the DS Embertorm build. You're sacrificing that for the additional 15% increased fire damage. But whether you're playing the Confl spec or the DS Embertorm spec, both these specs are just going to outperform any Shadow Warlock on AoE. Because what's a Shadow Warlock going to do? Well, they're going to tab Corruption and then Hellfire. But the Hellfire is just way weaker with any Shadow spec because you don't have Embertorm. Especially DS Embertorm, where you have 25% increased fire damage. So yeah, Shadow or Fire is certainly better than Shadow on trash. So this is just a brief, like what's the difference between, DS Embertorm and Confl. Well, DS Embertorm, you just get 15% more fire damage. That's really it. But then Confl, instead of 15% overall damage, you get 20% more damage on immolate because you have 5 out of 5 instead of 1 out of 5. You get Confl, nice ability. And then you also have an Imp out who has improved Imp and improved Firebolt. And you also get instant corruption with the Confl build. A lot of good stuff, but 15% fire damage is also nice as well. So now let's get into the math, right? So I've been talking a lot about Fire Warlock, but let's actually look at the math. So this is an example of like a a best in slot or very near best in slot for like AQ40, right? You may be able to, like, you might not wear Bloodvine, you might wear more of the tier 2.5, but this is like an example setup, right? So I actually simmed it. So this is a screenshot of my sim. So I started with Shadow Warlock, right? So the notable things are 60-second fight, single target. This is with world buffs. And then this is my guild's current situation. So we have 2 warlocks in my guild. I wish we had 3. I wish we had 4. Even 5. But we have 2. And both have ISB with a 34% crit. As you can see, I chose that number because look at the gear setup. 34% crit with like roll buffs. So that's what I plugged in. And since there's 2 warlocks, there is no Curse of Shadows. We do have improved Shadowbolt. No Curse of Shadows though. And no Shadow Weaving, because that's the case in my guild. So let's look at the damage, right? So this is SM Ruin, spamming Shadowbolt with no Shadow Weaving and no Curse of Shadows, because there's only 2 warlocks, and pretty much every guild is going to have more mages than warlocks, because mages are just way more popular. So this is like the worst case scenario, which is the scenario I find myself in my guild, which is why I'm going to be playing Fire in AQ. Because we don't have Curse of Shadows, we don't have Shadow Weaving. So the sim to DPS for like Phase 5 Biss under these circumstances with world buffs is about 871 DPS. As you can see, pretty much all the DPS is coming from Shadowbolt and a few other sources as well. But now let's look at these exact same parameters, but best case scenario being you have a Shadow Priest in your guild and you have a 3rd Warlock to give you Curse of Shadows. So that changes our DPS from 871 to 1055. Pretty notable DPS increase, getting a Shadow Weaving and Curse of Shadows. So this is like best case scenario compared to worst case scenario. Pretty good damage, if I do say so myself. But now, let's look at the fire specs. Because this whole video has been talking about fire compared to shadow. One, I look silly if the sims say that fire is just way worse. I would be silly. But let's look at it. So the things I changed is that there's no ISB, improved Shadowbolt, because we don't need it, because we're playing fire. And no Shadow Weaving, because we don't need it, because we're playing fire. And then we do get Curse of Elements, because even with 2 Warlocks in your guild, one's going to be assigned to Wreck, the other one's going to be assigned to Curse of Elements. Alright, so sorry about that pause. My son woke up a bit. I kind of lost my train of thought, but let's just keep going, right? So, like I was saying, no ISB, no Weaving, but we do have Curse of Elements because if you have at least 2 Warlocks in your guild, one's going to be assigned to Wreck, one's going to be assigned to Curse of Elements. So this is the DS Embertorm build, the Demonic Sacrifice Embertorm. You'll see it says 908 DPS, and you'll notice that most of it's Serum Pain, a bit from Immolate Corruption, and like 1 cast of Shadowburn at the end. But there's a reason this 908 is inaccurate, and that is because I could not figure out how to change the sims from sacrificing Succubus for 15% shadow damage to sacrificing Imp for 15% fire damage. So what I did was I manually adjusted it with math and on here. So this is what I did, right? So I looked at the corruption to shadowburn damage, because these are shadow sources. 68 DPS plus 20 DPS. So that's 88.6, and then 15% of that is 13.29. So I subtracted 13.29 DPS from this number to account for the loss of the demonic sacrifice succubus shadow damage. But then I added the Searing Pain and Immolate damage, 661 and 158. Added those up, 820 DPS. 15% of that is 123 DPS. And then added that to this number to account for gaining the 15% fire damage, demonic sacrifice. So we get that 908.94 minus 13.29 plus 123.06. That brings our simmed DPS for DS Embertorm up to 1018.71. And then let's look at the Confl build. You'll see that Searing Pain is still the bulk of our damage, but with the last pack it was like 72% of it. Now it's like 46 because we get more damage from Immolate. We get Confl. Corruption is still a slight DPS increase to include in our rotation. Then we have our Imp Blastin', Firebolt, and then the Shadow Burn as well for like the last millisecond of the fight. And that sims our DPS at 924.91. So let's quickly look at the sims. Starting in last place is SM Ruin with 2 Warlocks and no Shadow Priest. So this is the worst case scenario. This is my life in my guild because we can't recruit a 3rd Warlock. We're trying, but unsuccessful so far. That would be 872 DPS, which is 82% of the max, 100%. Then the next worst, or I say the next best, is the Confl spec with improved Scorch from a mage and Curse of Elements, which is really the 2 things you need. Improved Scorch being 10% fire damage and Curse of Elements being 10% fire damage. That sims at 925 DPS, 87, almost 88% of the max. Then the next high sim is DS Embertorm with improved Scorch and Curse of Elements as well. That's at 1019, which is 97% of the max. And then the best case scenario, the max DPS was SM Ruin with 3 Warlocks and a Shadow Priest, bringing your sim DPS to 1055. That is the highest. So the 2 fire specs do sim lower than Shadow if you have everything you could want as a Shadow Warlock. But this is just single target. For trash, the fire specs are definitely better, without question, than any Shadow spec. But for single target boss encounters, Shadow Warlock is still the best if you have Curse of Shadows and Shadow Weaving. But a lot of guilds don't have all of that. My guild, we don't have either of those things. So I'm going to be playing Fire in AQ. But now that we've decided, if you've decided, okay, I'm going to give Fire a shot. Do I play DS Embertorm or do I play Confl? Now let's look at them. So with DS Embertorm, compared to Confl, we get 15% more damage on Hellfire for AoE. That's probably the biggest selling point. We also get 10% more damage on single target, just according to the sims. Like DS Embertorm simmed 1019 versus Confl simming 925. It's about 10% damage. But the downside for DS Embertorm is that you can have threat problems, especially on Horde side, where you don't have Blessing of Salvation. You're spamming Searing Pain and getting a lot of crits that could cause a raid wipe. Threat problems, 73% of her damage is from Searing Pain, compared to Confl where it's only 47%. So most of our damage is Searing Pain, and if we're blasting Searing Pain without salve on Horde, getting crits, world buffed, it could cause a problem. But then let's look at Confl. So it's a more engaging rotation for sure. You get a lot more to do. Immolate's more impactful. You have instant cast corruption. Then you also have Conflag, the capstone talent. You can look at that as a plus or minus, depending on how you look at it. If you just want to chill and raid as easily, as simply as possible, then a more engaging rotation would be downside. But if you actually enjoy playing your class and like to have fun, I would say Conflag is definitely more fun than DS Emberstorm. But it's more mana inefficient in that Conflag costs a lot of mana, Immolate costs a lot of mana, and Searing Pain does not cost that much mana. So you're casting more Immolates and you're casting Conflags on cooldown with the Conflag spec. For a longer fight, the difference between them is going to become even greater, in that you have to life tap more as Conflag Warlock compared to a DS Emberstorm Warlock. You're more mobile with the Conflag spec because you have Conflag, which is instant cast, and you have Corruption instant cast. So trying to position yourself properly, you can cast while moving more effectively as a Conflag spec Warlock than DS Emberstorm Warlock. Position yourself into the correct position to Hellfire on trash. Even though Hellfire is more powerful as a DS Emberstorm Warlock, you may pull ahead just by getting into position, able to actually do damage while you're getting into position, whereas a DS Emberstorm Warlock really can't. And then the other upside to the Conflag spec is that you have way less threat problems. You still may have some threat problems because Searing Pain is your main filler, but only 47% of your damage is from Searing Pain, compared to 73% with the DS Emberstorm. And also, I'm going to move up just a hair, 8% of that damage is not even your own character, it's your imp. 71.36 of that DPS won't have anything to do with your threat, is because it is your imp. So, way less threat problems. Still some, to be honest. Searing Pain still does a lot of threat. But if you think you have threat problems as a Conflag Warlock, you're really going to have to be staring at that meter as a DS Emberstorm Warlock. And now let's look at like the best case scenario. So if you want to pump as much damage as possible, you're going to be playing both Shadow and Fire. So the ideal situation for the Gigapump PvE Warlocks is on bosses. If you're in a guild that has 3 Warlocks and a Shadow Priest, you're playing Shadow Warlock, SM Ruin or DS Ruin. But then as soon as the boss encounter is done, use your dual spec, you swap over to DS Emberstorm or Conflag. I would say as a rule, DS Emberstorm would be a little bit better just because your Hellfire is that much stronger. But it just depends on the trash pack, right? If it's like the trash after Twin Imps where everything's kind of spread out, then the Conflag spec is going to outperform because you can tab Immolate and Corruption, and it's going to be stronger as Conflag because Corruption being instant cast allows you to move, and also tab Immolate with the Conflag spec is better because you have 5 out of 5 improved Immolate, whereas DS Emberstorm only has 1 out of 5 improved Immolate. But either way, on trash, whether you're playing DS Emberstorm or Conflag, you're going to outperform the Warlocks who are just spamming Shadowbolt. It's just, that's just how it is. But yeah, that's pretty much the video. TLDR, if your guild hates you, like they do, no, I'm joking. If you're in a guild that doesn't have 3 Warlocks and a Shadow Priest, then definitely try Fire out in AQ. You might want to talk to your main tank. Let them know, hey, I'm going to be blasting Searing Pain. Good luck. But definitely give it a shot because it's going to outperform. It's going to outperform what you're currently doing if you don't have Curse of Shadows and Shadow Weaving. And even if you do have all that stuff, try it out for trash. because it's gonna do more damage than Shadowbolt. I'll tell you that much. All these nice fire talents is gonna just melt through trash. It's gonna be nice. And personally, I'm gonna be playing SM Ruin and DS Embertorm as soon as AQ comes out. And you know, if you've been watching the channel, I'm a PvP head, and I love Confl for PvP, but I like SM Ruin for PvP a lot as well. So I'm just going to be playing SM Ruin for PvP for the time being, while I have some fun in AQ, burning everything alive with Immolate and Hellfire and all that. But yeah, thank you for watching the video. If you liked it, I haven't asked this yet, but please like, subscribe, and try to share this video with your Warlock friends, because I like to get the word out, because I haven't seen a whole lot of talk about Fire Warlock. But in this video, I mean, I showed you the math. It outperforms SM Ruin if you don't have Weaving and Curse of Shadows. It just simply does more damage. And on Trash, you'll find that you're going to be up there at the top of the meters with the mages and the Fury Warriors. You can do some serious trash damage as a Fire Warlock. But yeah, that's the video. And thank you for watching. See you next time.